The wind cut like a blade. It screamed down from the Bighorn Mountains with the fury of something betrayed tearing through the valley where Cottonwood Ridge huddled against the December cold. The town was a collection of lies, weathered storefronts, pretending to be permanent, frozen mud streets, pretending to be civilization and wooden crosses in the cemetery, pretending that anyone here had died with dignity. Samuel Hartwell knew lies when he saw them. He had worn one pinned to his chest for 32 years. The badge was tarnished now, scratched by 3 decades of compromises, but it still caught the pale afternoon light as Sam rode toward the commotion at the town's edge. His mare, a gray roan named Temperance, picked her way through snowdrifts with the caution of an animal that understood mortality. Sam understood it too. 61 years, 3 weeks from retirement, and a lifetime spent believing that the law meant something beyond the men who enforced it. He was about to learn how wrong he had been. The crowd's noise rose above the wind, a low, hungry rumble like distant thunder. Sam urged Temperance forward, and the town came into focus, the general store, with its faded sign, the saloon leaking lamplight into the gray day, the blacksmith's forge cold and dark. But everyone was moving toward the abandoned church at the eastern edge, the one that had lost its preacher to cholera 2 winters back and never found another. The building leaned like a drunk, its white paint peeling away to reveal rotted wood beneath, and its bell tower had collapsed years ago. Now the structure served only as a reminder that even God could abandon a place. Sam dismounted 50 yards out. The crowd was too thick to ride through, and something in his gut, the same instinct that had kept him breathing through 100 gunfights, told him that charging in would end poorly. He tied Temperance to a fence post, checked that his Colt revolver sat easy in its holster, and walked toward the noise. The crowd parted for him, but not out of respect. They parted the way people do for disease, with careful steps and averted eyes. Sam saw faces he recognized from his patrol through the territory. The baker's wife with flowers still dusting her shawl, the school teacher clutching a Bible, a dozen ranch hands with windburned skin and empty eyes. They all watched him pass and none of them spoke. That was the first warning. When a mob goes silent at the sight of law, it means the mob has decided it is the law. The church doors hung open, one hinge broken, so they yawned wide like a mouth mid-scream. Sam stepped inside and the cold followed him. The interior was worse than the outside. Pews had been torn apart for firewood, leaving rows of splintered stumps. The floor was covered in snow, blown through gaps in the walls, and the altar at the front was scarred with knife marks and obscenities. But the crowd had gathered here anyway, packed shoulder to shoulder, breath fogging in the frozen air. At least 60 people, maybe more, all of them facing forward, all of them watching the same thing. Sam pushed through to the front, and his heart stopped. 7 figures stood on crude wooden scaffolding beneath the warped remains of the church's crucifix. 7 nooses hung from the crossbeam, and 7 necks wore those nooses like obscene jewelry. But only one figure drew Sam's attention, held it with the grip of a fist around his throat. A girl, barely 20 if that. Her hands were bound behind her back with hemp rope so tight that blood had soaked through to drip onto the snow at her feet. Her hair, ash blonde and matted, hung in frozen clumps around a face that had once been soft, but was now carved hollow by hunger and terror. Her dress was little more than rags torn at the shoulder and stained with mud. Her feet were bare, the toes blackened with frostbite. She shivered so violently that the rope around her neck swayed, and her eyes, wide gray and unblinking, stared at something beyond the crowd, beyond the church, beyond Wyoming itself. She was dying by inches, and no one was stopping it. Sam's hand moved toward his gun, but he stopped. 60 people surrounded him. He was one man, and jurisdiction in the territories was a knife's edge. U.S. Marshals had authority, but local law enforcement could claim primacy if they acted first. Sam needed to understand the situation before he escalated it. A man stood beside the scaffolding, one boot resting on the plank that would drop the girl to her death. He was 40-something, tall and lean, with a sheriff's star pinned to a sheepskin coat. His face was weathered handsome in the way that cruelty can be handsome, and his eyes were the pale blue of a winter sky just before a killing frost. He held a Winchester rifle casually barrel-pointed at the ground, and he smiled at the crowd like a showman about to perform his best trick. Sheriff Wade Thorne. Sam knew the name, knew the reputation. Thorne kept Cottonwood Ridge running smoothly, meaning the right people prospered, the right people suffered, and anyone who objected found themselves on the wrong side of a rope. Sam had filed complaints with the territorial governor twice. Nothing had come of them. Thorne had friends in high places. "Glad you could join us, Marshal," Thorne called out, his voice carrying over the wind. "We're just about to dispense some justice." Sam stepped closer, careful to keep his hands visible. "What's the charge?" "Theft." Thorne gestured to the girl with his rifle. "This vagrant here stole bread from the bakery. 100 loaves to be precise. That's food from the mouths of hardworking people. In case you haven't noticed, Marshal, we're in the middle of winter. Stealing food is the same as murder out here." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Sam scanned their faces, saw hunger there, saw desperation, saw the kind of righteousness that only comes from suffering. These people were starving. The winter had been brutal. Early snows failed crops, supply wagons delayed for weeks. Sam had seen towns turn savage under less pressure, but something didn't fit. 100 loaves, Sam said slowly. He looked at the girl, at her skeletal frame, her hollow cheeks. "Where'd she store them? She doesn't look like she's eaten 100 crumbs, let alone 100 loaves." Thorne's smile tightened. "Sold them on the black market probably, or gave them to her vagrant friends. Point is, she took what wasn't hers, and the law says that's a hanging offense." "Territorial law requires a trial," Sam said. "We had one." Thorne gestured to an old man standing near the altar, the town's mayor, presumably a corpulent figure with a fur-lined coat and a face like a rotting plum. Mayor Whitmore presided, jury of 12, unanimous verdict, guilty. "Where's the jury now?" "Dismissed. It's cold, Marshal. We don't keep people standing around longer than necessary." Sam turned to the crowd. "Anyone here serve on that jury?" Silence. 60 people and not one raised a hand. Sam felt something cold settle in his gut, colder than the wind, colder than the snow. This wasn't justice. This was theater. The verdict had been decided before the trial ever started, and the jury had been selected for their willingness to comply, then sent home before anyone could question them. He turned back to Thorne. "I want to see the evidence." "Evidence?" Thorne laughed. "Marshal, she was caught with the bread, red-handed." "Then where is it?" "Eaten or sold." "I already told you." "So you have no bread, no witnesses, and a jury that's conveniently unavailable." Sam took another step forward, close enough now that Thorne had to tilt his head up to meet his eyes. "Sounds to me like you've got nothing but a scared girl and a crowd looking for someone to blame." The murmur in the crowd shifted, uncertain now. Thorne's smile vanished. "Careful, Marshal. You're a guest in my town, and your jurisdiction ends where mine begins. This is a local matter. Hanging is a federal matter when it's done without due process." "We had due process." Thorne's voice hardened. "You questioning the integrity of this court? I'm questioning whether there was a court at all." The crowd's murmur turned hostile. Sam felt the shift, felt the air thicken with the promise of violence. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and standing in a place where law meant whatever Thorne said it meant. This was the moment he should walk away. File a report, let the territorial authorities handle it, follow procedure. That was what 32 years of service had taught him: trust the system, even when the system moved slowly, even when the system failed. But then the girl made a sound. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't even a word. It was a choked, desperate gasp, the sound of someone drowning in air, and it cut through Sam like a bullet. He looked at her, really looked, and saw what he had been trying not to see. She was the same age Emma would have been if Emma had lived. The same ash blonde hair, the same gray eyes, the same look of betrayed confusion, the look that said the world had promised fairness and delivered cruelty instead. Emma had made that sound 5 years ago when the hired guns had cornered her outside the general store. Sam had been 2 towns away, following procedure, gathering evidence, doing everything by the book. By the time he arrived, Emma was dead, and the men who killed her were drinking in a saloon laughing. They'd stood trial. They'd walked free. And Sam had done nothing but file more paperwork, trust more systems, believe more lies. He was done believing. Sam's hand moved to his belt, and in one fluid motion, he drew his knife. The crowd gasped, stumbled back, and Thorne raised his rifle, but Sam was already moving. 3 strides took him to the scaffolding, and he leaped up, wrapping one arm around the girl's waist and slashing the rope with the knife. The hemp parted with a sound like a sigh, and the noose fell away, and the girl collapsed into Sam's arm, her body limp and trembling. "Stop him!" Thorne shouted. But Sam was already down, already carrying the girl toward the door. The crowd hesitated, unsure whether to obey Thorne or the instinct that said a man who moves with that kind of certainty is a man you don't stand in front of. Sam didn't give them time to decide. He kicked the church door wide, stepped into the blizzard, and didn't look back. Behind him, Thorne's voice cut through the wind. "You just made a mistake, Marshall. A fatal one." Sam kept walking. He reached Temperance, who snorted and pawed at the snow, sensing danger. Sam hoisted the girl onto the saddle, then swung up behind her, wrapping his coat around her shivering frame. She didn't speak, didn't move, just stared ahead with those gray eyes, and Sam wondered if she was even conscious or if her body had simply given up on processing reality. "Stay with me," he murmured. "We're getting out of here." He urged Temperance forward, away from the church, away from the town, away from the crowd that was beginning to spill out into the snow, shouting and pointing. A gunshot cracked the air, and snow exploded near Temperance's hooves, but Sam didn't stop. He leaned low, shielded the girl with his body, and rode hard into the white. The wind swallowed them, and Cottonwood Ridge disappeared behind a curtain of snow. Sam didn't stop riding until the town was an hour behind them, and the landscape had turned into an endless, featureless plain of white. The blizzard was getting worse, the kind of storm that erased trails and buried landmarks, and Sam knew that if he didn't find shelter soon, they would both freeze to death. Temperance was breathing hard, her flanks steaming, and the girl in his arms had gone ominously still. "Talk to me," Sam said, shaking her gently. "What's your name?" No response. Her eyes were open, but they didn't track, didn't focus. Shock, maybe, or hypothermia setting in. Sam cursed under his breath and scanned the horizon. There, a dark smudge in the snow, barely visible through the storm. A cluster of rocks, or maybe an old trapper's cabin. It was the only shelter for miles. He urged Temperance toward it, and as they drew closer, the smudge resolved into a crude structure, a lean-to made from stacked stones and warped timber, half buried in a snowdrift. Not much, but it would keep the wind off. Sam dismounted, pulled the girl down carefully, and carried her inside. The interior was cramped and dark, the floor covered in old straw and animal droppings, but it was dry. Sam laid the girl down, then went back out to lead Temperance under the overhang, tying her where she'd have some protection. He unsaddled her, rubbed her down quickly, and grabbed his bedroll and saddlebags. By the time he returned to the lean-to, the girl's shivers had worsened, her teeth chattering so hard he could hear them over the wind. Hypothermia. She needed warmth fast. Sam pulled a wool blanket from his bedroll and wrapped it around her, then built a small fire using the dry straw and a flint striker. The flames caught grudgingly, spitting smoke, but they held. He positioned the girl close to the fire, then dug through his saddlebags for food. He had hardtack jerky, a tin of beans. He opened the beans, held the tin over the fire until the contents warmed, then knelt beside the girl. "You need to eat," he said gently. Her eyes flicked to him, the first sign of awareness he'd seen. She stared at the tin of beans like it was a mirage, something that would vanish if she blinked. Slowly, hesitantly, she reached out with shaking hands. Sam helped her guide the tin to her lips, and she drank the bean juice first, gulping it down like a woman dying of thirst. Then she ate the beans one at a time, chewing mechanically, and Sam watched her throat work with each swallow, watched the life come back into her face by painful degrees. When the tin was empty, she set it down and looked at him. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Sam waited. Finally, in a voice barely louder than the wind, she spoke. "Why?" The word hung between them, vast and unanswerable. Sam didn't have a good response. He didn't know why he'd cut her down, why he'd thrown away 32 years of playing by the rules, why he'd made himself a fugitive to save a girl whose name he didn't even know. All he knew was that when he looked at her on that scaffolding, he'd seen Emma, and he couldn't stand by and watch another girl die while he followed procedure. "Because the innocent shouldn't hang," Sam said finally. It was the only truth he had. The girl stared at him, and something in her eyes cracked just a little. Her face crumpled, and she began to cry, silent, shaking sobs that seemed to tear something loose inside her. Sam let her cry. He knew from experience that some things couldn't be comforted, only endured. After a while, the sobs subsided, and she wiped her face with the edge of the blanket, leaving streaks of grime and tears. "My name is Rose," she said, her voice steadier now. "Rose McKenna." "Samuel Hartwell," Sam said. "People call me Sam. You're a marshal. For 3 more weeks. Rose frowned at that but didn't ask. Instead, she looked down at her hands still bound at the wrists with the hemp rope. The bindings had cut deep and the skin was raw and bleeding. Sam took out his knife and cut the rope carefully, then used a strip of cloth from his saddlebag to bandage the wounds. Rose winced but didn't pull away. "They said you stole 100 loaves of bread," Sam said. "Did you?" Rose's jaw tightened. For a long moment she didn't answer, and Sam thought she might refuse to talk. But then she looked up at him, and her eyes were hard defiant. "I took 1 loaf," she said. "One. And I didn't take it for myself." "Who did you take it for?" "A boy, 6 years old. His mother froze to death a week ago, and he's been living under the old railroad overpass trying to survive on snow and scraps. I found him 3 days ago, and he was so thin you could see his ribs through his shirt. I begged the baker for bread. I begged his wife. I begged anyone who would listen. They all said the same thing: they didn't have enough to spare, and vagrants don't get charity." Rose's voice shook, but she didn't cry again. "So I waited until the bakery closed, and I broke in through the back window. I took 1 loaf, one. I brought it to the boy, and he ate half of it, and he smiled for the first time since his mother died. The next morning, the sheriff's men dragged me out of my camp and said I'd stolen 100 loaves. They said I was a thief and a menace, and they were going to hang me as an example." Sam felt a slow, cold rage building in his chest. "And the boy? Still under that overpass as far as I know. Probably dead by now." "Where's the overpass?" 2 miles north of town." "Why?" Sam didn't answer. He stood, grabbed his coat, and headed for the lean-to's entrance. Rose scrambled to her feet, nearly tripping over the blanket. "Where are you going?" "To get the boy," Sam said. "If he's still alive, we're bringing him back here." "It's a blizzard. You'll freeze." "Then I'll freeze." Sam pulled his hat down, checked his revolver, and glanced back at Rose. "Stay by the fire. If I'm not back in 2 hours, take Temperance and ride south. There's a fort about 50 miles out. Tell them what happened. They'll protect you." "I'm coming with you," Rose said. "No, you're not. You can barely stand." "He trusts me. If you show up alone, he'll run." Sam hesitated. She had a point. A 6-year-old boy living under an overpass wouldn't trust a stranger, especially not one who looked like law enforcement. But bringing Rose into the storm was a risk. She was weak, frostbitten, and traumatized. If the cold didn't kill her, exhaustion would. "If you slow me down," Sam said, "I'm carrying you back here." "Understood." Rose nodded. She wrapped the blanket around her shoulders like a cloak, and together they stepped out into the blizzard. The storm had worsened. Visibility was down to 10 feet, and the wind screamed like something alive and angry. Sam led Temperance by the reins, and Rose walked beside him, hunched against the cold. They moved north, navigating by instinct in the faint memory of the land's contours. Sam had patrolled this area before knew the general layout, but in a blizzard, every landmark disappeared, and the world became a blank page. After 20 minutes, Rose grabbed his arm and pointed. "There." Sam followed her gesture and saw the dark shape of the overpass ahead, a rusted iron structure that had been part of an abandoned railroad line. The tracks were long gone, torn up, and sold for scrap, but the overpass remained a skeleton, slowly being consumed by the prairie. Beneath it, out of the wind, a small figure huddled in a nest of rags. Rose broke away from Sam and ran, or tried to. Her legs gave out after 3 steps, and she collapsed in the snow. Sam caught her, steadied her, and then they walked the last 30 feet together. As they approached, the figure beneath the overpass stirred, and a pale, dirt-streaked face turned toward them. A boy, maybe 6 like Rose had said, though it was hard to tell. Starvation had made him look both older and younger. His face gaunt and ancient, his body small and fragile. His clothes were little more than rags, and his feet were wrapped in strips of cloth that did nothing to keep out the cold. When he saw Rose, his eyes widened, and he tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't hold him. "Rose," he whispered. His voice was a rasp, as if he'd been screaming and had nothing left. Rose knelt beside him, pulled him into her arms, and held him. The boy clung to her, his small body shaking. Sam stood back, giving them space, and felt something twist in his chest. This was why Rose had stolen the bread. Not for greed, not for profit, but for this broken child who had been abandoned by every adult who should have protected him. "What's his name?" Sam asked quietly. "Timothy," Rose said without looking up. His mother called him Timothy. Sam knelt beside them, unwrapped his coat, and draped it over both Rose and Timothy. We need to move. He won't survive another hour out here. Rose nodded, but when she tried to stand, her legs gave out again. Sam didn't hesitate. He scooped Timothy into his arms. The boy weighed almost nothing, like holding a bundle of sticks, and helped Rose to her feet. She leaned on him, and together they made their way back to Temperance. The ride back to the lean-to was brutal. The storm battered them from every direction, and Sam lost the trail, twice had to backtrack and navigate by feel. Timothy didn't move, didn't make a sound, and Sam wondered if the boy had already slipped away. But when they finally reached the shelter and Sam laid him down by the fire, Timothy's eyes fluttered open. "Hungry," Timothy whispered. Sam opened another tin of beans, warmed it over the fire, and fed Timothy one spoonful at a time. The boy ate slowly, carefully, as if afraid the food would be taken away. Rose sat beside him, one hand on his shoulder, and watched with an expression Sam couldn't quite read. Relief, guilt, exhaustion, all tangled together. When Timothy had eaten half the tin, he fell asleep, curled up next to Rose like a wounded animal seeking warmth. Rose stroked his hair absently, and Sam saw tears on her cheeks again, though she didn't make a sound. "You saved his life," Sam said. "I almost got him killed," Rose replied. "If they'd hanged me, no one would have looked for him. He would have died alone. But you didn't hang, and he's alive. That counts for something." Rose looked at him, and her expression was raw, stripped of all pretense. "Why did you do it? Why did you cut me down? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." Sam was quiet for a long time. The fire crackled and the wind howled outside, and he thought about all the ways he could answer that question. He could tell her about Emma, about the guilt that had followed him for 5 years, about the badge he'd worn like armor, and how it had failed to protect the one person he loved most. He could tell her that when he saw her on that scaffolding, he saw his own failure staring back at him, and cutting her down was the only way he knew to make it right. But instead he said the innocent shouldn't hang. Rose held his gaze, and something passed between them, an understanding maybe, or a shared recognition of the world's cruelty and the small, stubborn acts of resistance that made life bearable. She nodded slowly, then turned back to Timothy, and Sam let the silence settle. They stayed like that for a long time, the three of them huddled around a dying fire in a forgotten corner of Wyoming, while outside the storm raged on. By morning, the blizzard had passed, leaving behind a landscape so white and still, it looked like the world had been erased. Sam woke stiff and cold, his ribs aching from sleeping on the hard ground. Rose and Timothy were still asleep, curled together beneath the blanket, and Sam let them rest while he stepped outside to check on Temperance. The mare was fine, pawing at the snow to reach the frozen grass beneath. Sam fed her some oats from his saddlebag, then scanned the horizon. No sign of pursuit. Thorne and his men wouldn't be able to track them through the storm, and even if they tried, the snow had covered Sam's trail. They had time, but not much. Thorne wouldn't give up. Men like him never did. Sam returned to the lean-to, added more fuel to the fire, and waited for Rose and Timothy to wake. When Rose finally stirred, she looked disoriented, as if she'd forgotten where she was. Then memory returned, and her face hardened. "What happens now?" she asked. "We can't go back to Cottonwood Ridge," Sam said. "Thorne will have you arrested again, and this time he won't wait for a trial. We need to get you somewhere safe." "Where's safe? They'll send word to every town in the territory. No one will take me in." "Fort Grant," Sam said. "It's 50 miles south, military jurisdiction. Thorne has no authority there, and I know the commanding officer. He's a fair man. We present the facts, and he'll grant you protection." Rose shook her head. "You really think the facts matter? They said I stole 100 loaves. They'll say I'm lying about Timothy. They'll say you're a fool who got played by a pretty face." "Then we find proof," Sam said. "Proof of what?" "Proof that you didn't take 100 loaves. Proof that someone else did." Rose laughed bitterly. "You're going to investigate a bread theft. You're a U.S. Marshal. You've got better things to do than—" "3 weeks," Sam interrupted. "I've got 3 weeks left on this badge, and then I'm done. I spent 32 years trusting the system, and the system failed me when it mattered most. I'm not making that mistake again." Rose studied him, and Sam could see her weighing his words, deciding whether to trust him. Finally, she nodded. "All right, but if we're going to do this, we do it smart. No charging in, no trusting anyone until we're sure." Agreed. Timothy woke then, blinking up at them with wide, fearful eyes. Rose immediately knelt beside him, murmuring reassurances, and Sam saw the boy relax at the sound of her voice. It reminded Sam of the way Emma used to look at him before the world taught her that trust was a luxury. They spent the morning preparing. Sam shared the last of his supplies, hardtack jerky, a canteen of water that had half frozen overnight. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep them moving. He saddled Temperance, helped Rose and Timothy onto the mare, and they set out south away from Cottonwood Ridge, away from the hanging tree, away from the place where justice had died and been resurrected by a knife and a desperate choice. As they rode, Sam thought about what came next. Thorne would be looking for them. The mayor, Edmund Whitmore, if Sam remembered right, would want this handled quietly, which meant hired guns, bounties, and a manhunt that wouldn't stop until Rose was dead or exonerated. Sam had made himself a target, had thrown away 3 decades of goodwill with territorial authorities, and for what? To save a girl he didn't know and a boy who might not survive the winter anyway. But when he glanced back and saw Rose holding Timothy, saw the way the boy had finally stopped shaking, saw the faint spark of hope in Rose's eyes, he knew he'd made the right choice. The system had failed. The badge had failed. But he hadn't. Not this time. 3 weeks until retirement, and Sam Hartwell was finally doing the job he'd sworn to do 32 years ago, protecting the innocent no matter the cost. They reached Sam's cabin by midday. It sat at the base of a low hill surrounded by pine trees and half buried in snow. The structure was simple timber walls, a stone chimney, a single room with a loft, but it was solid, built to last, and it had kept Sam alive through 5 brutal winters. He'd bought the land with the idea that when he retired, he'd live here away from towns and people and the endless, exhausting work of pretending that the law meant something. Now he was bringing that work home. Sam dismounted, helped Rose and Timothy down, and led them inside. The cabin was cold, the fire long dead, but it was shelter. Sam immediately went to the hearth, built a new fire, and got it roaring while Rose and Timothy stood in the center of the room looking around with something like awe. "You live here?" Rose asked. "When I'm not riding patrol," Sam said. "It's not much, but it's mine." Rose's gaze landed on the dust-covered chair by the window, then on the shelf where a woman's hairbrush and a small locket sat untouched. She didn't ask, but Sam saw the question in her eyes. He turned away, focused on the fire. "There's a bed in the loft," he said. "You and Timothy take it. I'll sleep down here." "We can't." "You can." Sam's voice was firm. "You're exhausted, and the boy needs rest. Go." Rose hesitated, then nodded. She helped Timothy up the ladder to the loft, and Sam heard them settle in, heard Rose whispering something soft and soothing. Sam sat by the fire, stared into the flames, and thought about Emma. She would have been Rose's age now if she'd lived. She would have had that same fierce determination, that same refusal to let the world break her. Sam had raised Emma to believe in justice, to believe that doing the right thing mattered, and then the world had punished her for it. The men who killed her had walked free, and Sam had done nothing but file reports, trust the system, wait for justice that never came. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the locket, the one that should have been buried with Emma, the one he'd kept because letting go of it felt like letting go of her. Inside was a photograph, faded and cracked Emma at 16, smiling, her hair in braids, her eyes bright with the kind of hope that comes before the world teaches you better. Sam ran his thumb over the image, and something in his chest cracked. He'd failed Emma, but he wouldn't fail Rose. Sam let Rose and Timothy sleep through the afternoon while he took stock of their situation. His supplies were running low, enough food for a few days maybe, but not enough to last a siege if Thorne came looking. He had ammunition, a Winchester rifle, the Colt on his hip, and a shotgun above the door. Weapons wouldn't be the problem. The problem was that he was one man against a town, and towns had resources that individuals didn't, numbers, money, and the kind of moral certainty that comes from believing they're on the right side. Sam needed allies. He needed information. And most of all, he needed proof that Rose was telling the truth. That evening, when Rose came downstairs, Sam was sitting at the table, studying a map of the territory. Rose approached quietly, her movements cautious, as if she expected him to change his mind and throw her out. Sam gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit. We need to talk." Rose sat folding her hands in her lap. In the firelight, she looked even younger, and Sam was struck again by how much she reminded him of Emma. Not just in appearance, but in the way she carried herself, careful, watchful, ready to run. Tell me about the bread, Sam said. Start from the beginning. Rose took a breath, then began. She'd arrived in Cottonwood Ridge 3 months ago, drifting through like she'd drifted through a dozen other towns. No family, no job, no prospects, just another vagrant trying to survive winter. She'd found work mucking out stables, washing dishes, anything that paid a few coins or a hot meal. The townspeople tolerated her barely, but they didn't trust her. Vagrants were seen as thieves and troublemakers, and Rose had learned to keep her head down. Then she'd found Timothy. His mother, a widow named Clara, had been living in a shack on the outskirts of town, surviving on charity and whatever work she could find. When Clara got sick, pneumonia, Rose thought no one helped. The town doctor refused to see her without payment up front. The church offered prayers but no medicine. Clara died alone and Timothy was left with nothing. Rose had tried to take him in, but she had no home, no resources. She brought him scraps of food when she could, but it wasn't enough. Timothy was starving slowly and visibly, and no one cared. When Rose begged the baker for help, he'd laughed in her face. When she begged the mayor, he'd had her thrown out of his office. So she broke into the bakery. It was stupid, Rose said, her voice flat. I knew it was stupid, but I couldn't watch him die. I took one loaf, wrapped it in a cloth, and climbed out the window. I gave it to Timothy, and he ate half of it, and for the first time in days, he smiled. I thought I'd gotten away with it. What happened? The next morning, the sheriff's men dragged me out of my camp. They said someone reported seeing me near the bakery. They searched my things, found crumbs. Of course, they found crumbs I just fed Timothy. Then they said the bakery was missing 100 loaves, and I was the only suspect. 100 loaves, Sam repeated. That's a month's worth of inventory. Where would you even hide that much bread? Exactly, I told them I only took one loaf. I told them about Timothy. They didn't care. The Sheriff Thorne, he said I was lying, said I must have accomplices, said I was part of a theft ring. He arrested me, and the next thing I knew, I was standing on that scaffolding. Sam leaned back, processing. The story made sense, but it also raised questions. If Rose only took one loaf, then where were the other 99, Sean? And why would Thorne push so hard for an execution over a single missing loaf? Unless someone else took the bread, Sam said slowly, and they needed a scapegoat. Rose's eyes widened. You think someone framed me? I think someone stole 100 loaves, and when you happened to steal one at the same time, they saw an opportunity. Pin the whole theft on you, and they walk away clean. Who would do that? Someone with access to the bakery. Someone who knew the layout, knew when it would be empty, knew how to move that much inventory without being seen. Sam tapped the map. We need to go back to Cottonwood Ridge. Are you insane? They'll hang us both. Not if we're smart. We go at night, stay out of sight, and we find proof. We talk to the baker, check the storeroom, see if there's a ledger showing discrepancies. If someone stole 100 loaves, there's a paper trail. Rose shook her head. Even if we find proof, who's going to believe us? Thorne runs that town. The mayor backs him. The townspeople will side with them, not with a vagrant and a marshal who cut down a convicted criminal. Then we take it to Fort Grant. We bypass Cottonwood, entirely present the evidence to the military, and let them handle it. And if there is no evidence, Sam didn't answer. Because she was right, if they couldn't find proof, then this was over. Rose would be a fugitive for the rest of her life, and Sam would be a disgraced marshal who'd thrown away his career for nothing. But he'd lived 32 years following the rules, and the rules had let him down. It was time to break them. They left at midnight under a sky so clear and cold that the stars looked like shards of ice. Sam rode Temperance with Rose seated behind him, and they moved slowly, carefully navigating by moonlight. Timothy stayed at the cabin. Rose had argued against it, but Sam insisted. The boy was too weak to travel, and bringing him into danger would be reckless. The ride to Cottonwood Ridge took 3 hours. By the time they reached the outskirts, the town was dark, most of its residents asleep. Sam tied Temperance in a copse of trees and led Rose through the shadows, keeping to the alleys and avoiding the main street. The bakery was near the center of town, a 2-story building with a wooden sign that creaked in the wind. Sam checked for lights, saw none, and tried the back door. Locked. He pulled out his knife, worked the latch, and the door swung open with a soft creak. They slipped inside. The bakery smelled of flour and yeast, a comforting smell that seemed wrong in the context of what they were doing. Sam lit a small lantern, keeping the flame low, and they moved through the back room toward the storeroom. The door was ajar and inside empty. The shelves were nearly bare, only a few loaves left, and those looked days old. Sam frowned, scanned the room, and his eyes landed on a ledger sitting on a table near the door. He picked it up, flipped through the pages. There an entry from 3 days ago, inventory transfer 100 loaves, authorized by LWLW Lucas Whitmore. Sam showed Rose the entry, and her face went pale. The mayor's son. Looks like it. Why would he steal bread? Same reason anyone steals: he needed money or he needed to cover something up. Sam closed the ledger, tucked it under his arm. This is our proof. Now we need to— a floorboard creaked behind them. Sam spun, hand going to his gun, and found himself staring at a young woman, barely 19, with flour-dusted hands and wide, terrified eyes. She held a rolling pin like a weapon, and she was shaking so hard the pin rattled. "Please don't hurt me," she whispered. Sam raised his hand slowly. "We're not here to hurt anyone. Who are you?" Hannah Pierce. "I work here. I heard voices and I thought—" She broke off, tears streaming down her face. "If you're here to rob the place, there's nothing left to take. Lucas already—" She stopped, clapped a hand over her mouth, eyes wide with horror. Sam took a step forward, careful, non-threatening. "Hannah, listen to me. We're not here to rob you. We're here to find out what happened to the bread." "You just said Lucas took it." "Lucas Whitmore." Hannah nodded, still trembling. "I wasn't supposed to say anything. He said if I told he'd—" Her voice broke. "He said he'd burn my family's house down, with them inside." Rose moved forward, put a hand on Hannah's shoulder. "We're not going to let that happen, but we need you to tell us the truth. What did Lucas do?" Hannah lowered the rolling pin, sagged against the wall. "He came here 3 nights ago after we closed. He had keys. I don't know how he got them. He went into the storeroom and loaded 100 loaves into sacks, said he was taking them to sell. I tried to stop him and he—" She touched her cheek, and Sam saw the faint outline of a bruise. "He hit me, told me to say it was the vagrant girl. Told me if I didn't, he'd make sure my family suffered." Sam felt cold fury settle in his chest. "Did anyone else see him?" "No, it was late. Everyone was gone." "Will you testify to this?" Hannah's eyes filled with fresh tears. "I can't. He'll kill me. He'll kill my family." "Not if we stop him first," Sam said. "But we need your help. Write down what you just told us. Sign it. Date it. We'll take it to the military authorities and they'll protect you." "You don't understand," Hannah whispered. "Lucas doesn't work alone. His father, the mayor, he controls this whole town. The sheriff, the judge, everyone. If I go against them, I'm dead." "Then leave with us," Rose said. "We're going to Fort Grant. Come with us. Bring your family. You'll be safe there." Hannah looked between them, torn, and Sam could see the war happening behind her eyes. Fear versus hope, survival versus justice. Finally, she nodded. "Give me an hour. I'll get my family and we'll meet you at the edge of town." "Don't take longer," Sam warned. "If anyone sees you packing, it's over." Hannah nodded again, then slipped past them and out the back door, moving like a ghost. Sam and Rose followed, and they made their way back to Temperance, hearts pounding, ledger tucked safely under Sam's coat. They'd found their proof. Now they just had to survive long enough to use it. They waited at the edge of town, hidden in the trees, watching the road. An hour passed, then 2. Sam's nerves stretched thin, and he scanned the darkness for any sign of Hannah or pursuit. Beside him, Rose was silent, tense, her eyes fixed on the town. Finally, movement, 3 figures hurrying down the road carrying bundles. Hannah, a middle-aged man, her father probably, and a younger boy. They moved quickly, glancing over their shoulders, and Sam stepped out of the shadows to meet them. "This way," he said quietly. They followed him into the trees, and Sam helped them onto Temperance, and a second horse he'd taken from Thorne's stable. He'd figured the sheriff owed him. The group moved south away from Cottonwood Ridge, and as the town disappeared behind them, Sam felt a grim satisfaction settle in his chest. They had evidence, they had witnesses, and they had a chance. But Sam knew this wasn't over. Thorne would come for them, Lucas Whitmore would come for them, and Mayor Edmund Whitmore, who'd built his empire on corruption and violence, would come for them with everything he had. Sam touched the badge still pinned to his vest, tarnished, scratched, meaningless. He thought about Emma, about the promises he'd made, and broken, about the system he'd trusted and the lives it had destroyed. Then he unpinned the badge, held it in his palm for a long moment, and threw it into the snow. He was done being a marshal. He was done trusting the system. From now on, justice would be whatever he made it. They rode through the night, and behind them, Cottonwood Ridge burned with lanterns as Thorne's men realized their quarry had escaped. The chase had begun. Dawn broke cold and pale over the prairie, the sun a weak disk struggling through clouds that promised more snow. Sam pushed the horses hard through the night, and now as light crept across the frozen landscape, he finally allowed them to slow. Behind him, Hannah and her family huddled together on the second horse, exhausted and silent. Rose rode with Sam on Temperance, her arms wrapped around his waist, her breathing steady against his back. They'd covered 20 miles, maybe more, but Sam knew distance meant nothing if Thorne tracked them with fresh horse and a score of men. The sheriff would be furious, humiliated, and men like Thorne didn't forgive humiliation. They made examples of it. Sam reined Temperance to a stop beside a frozen creek bed where a cluster of cottonwoods offered some cover from the wind. He dismounted, helped Rose down, then turned to Hannah's family. Hannah's father was a weathered man in his 50s, a blacksmith judging by the burn scars on his forearms. He climbed off the horse stiffly, then lifted Hannah's younger brother down, a boy of maybe 10, with wide eyes and a face pinched from cold. Hannah herself moved like someone in shock, her hands trembling as she pulled a shawl tighter around her shoulders. "We need to rest the horses," Sam said. 20 minutes, no more." Hannah's father nodded, then extended a hand. "Name's Robert Pierce. This here's my son Daniel. You already met Hannah." Sam shook his hand. "Samuel Hartwell. That's Rose McKenna, and the boy back at my cabin is Timothy." "You're the marshal who cut her down," Robert said, glancing at Rose. "Hannah told us on the ride. Said you threw away your badge." "Not yet," Sam said, though even as he spoke, he remembered the weight of the badge in his palm before he tossed it into the snow. Symbolic maybe, but symbols had power. "But I will, soon as we reach Fort Grant. You think the military will help us?" "I know the commanding officer, Colonel Harrington. He's a hard man, but he's fair. If we show him the ledger, if Hannah testifies, he'll grant you protection and open an investigation." Robert's jaw tightened. "And if he doesn't, then we find another way." It wasn't much of an answer, but it was all Sam had. Robert seemed to accept it, or at least decided not to argue. He led Daniel to the creek where they knelt and broke through the thin ice to fill canteens. Hannah stayed near the horses, staring back toward Cottonwood Ridge, as if expecting Thorne to materialize out of the dawn. Rose moved to stand beside Sam, her voice low. "How long before they catch up?" "Depends. If Thorne left at first light, we've got 6 hours. If he left before, that could be less." "Can we make it to Fort Grant in 6 hours?" "Not with 2 horses and 7 people. We'll need to find fresh mounts or we'll have to stand and fight." Rose looked at him, and Sam saw something new in her eyes, not fear but a kind of grim determination. "If it comes to a fight, I can shoot." "You ever killed anyone?" "No, but I've thought about it plenty." Sam believed her. He'd seen that look before in soldiers who'd decided that survival mattered more than conscience. It was a dangerous look, the kind that led to mistakes and regrets, but he couldn't fault her for it. The world had given her every reason to think that way. "Let's hope it doesn't come to them," Sam said. They rested 15 minutes, then mounted up and rode south again. The landscape was bleak, endless stretches of white broken only by the occasional stand of trees or the dark line of a distant ridge. Sam scanned the horizon constantly, looking for movement, for dust clouds, for any sign of pursuit. So far, nothing. But he knew it was only a matter of time. By midday, the clouds thickened and snow began to fall again, light drifting flakes that blurred the world into soft obscurity. Sam cursed under his breath. Snow would slow them down, but it would also cover their tracks, make them harder to follow. A trade-off, and he'd take it. They crossed a low rise, and Sam spotted something ahead, a lone figure on horseback, moving perpendicular to their path, too far away to identify, but close enough to be trouble. Sam raised a hand, signaling the group to stop, and they halted in the cover of a shallow gully. "Stay here," Sam said. He dismounted, drew his Winchester from its saddle holster, and crept forward to get a better look. The rider was a man tall and lean, dressed in buckskins and a wide-brimmed hat. He sat his horse with the easy confidence of someone who'd spent more time in the saddle than on solid ground, and he carried a rifle across his lap. As Sam watched, the rider stopped, dismounted, and knelt in the snow examining something. Tracks, Sam realized. They're tracks. Sam's pulse quickened. This wasn't Thorn, the man was alone, and Thorn traveled with a pack. But that didn't mean he was friendly. Bounty hunters worked the territories, and if Thorn had put out word that Sam and Rose were fugitives, there'd be men eager to collect. Sam leveled his rifle, took aim, and shouted, "Don't move!" The rider didn't flinch. He stayed kneeling, relaxed, as if he'd been expecting this. Then he raised one hand, palm out, and turned his head slowly towards Sam. "Easy, Marshal," the man called. His voice was rough, gravelly, with an accent Sam couldn't quite place. Something southwestern, maybe Apache. "I'm not here for trouble." "Then why are you following us?" "I'm not. I'm following Thorn." Sam hesitated. The man's tone was casual, almost amused, and he made no move toward his rifle. Sam lowered his Winchester slightly but kept it ready. "Who are you?" The man stood, brushed snow off his knees, and walked towards Sam with his hands visible. As he drew closer, Sam got a better look, mid-50s, maybe older, with a face carved from hard lines and a lifetime of sun. His eyes were dark, almost black, and they missed nothing. A scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, pale against weathered skin, and his hair, gray-streaked and pulled back, was tied with a strip of rawhide. "Name's Dutch Brennan," the man said. He stopped 10 feet away, keeping his hands clear of his weapons. "I'm a tracker, cavalry scout back in the day. Now I work for whoever pays, but I'm not working for Thorn." "Then who are you working for?" "Myself." Dutch's mouth twitched, something that might have been a smile. "Heard there was a marshal who cut down a girl from a hanging, then rode off with evidence that it embarrassed the good people of Cottonwood Ridge. Figured that was a man worth meeting." Sam studied him, weighing the risk. Dutch didn't look like law enforcement, didn't carry himself like hired muscle. He looked like what he claimed to be: a tracker, independent, someone who lived outside the lines. But that didn't mean he could be trusted. "You still haven't told me why you're here," Sam said. Dutch's almost smile faded. "I'm here because Wade Thorn is a murdering son of a bitch, and I've been waiting 15 years for someone to put a bullet in him. When I heard you crossed him, I figured you might be the man to do it." "I'm not an assassin." "Didn't say you were, but Thorn's not going to let you walk away. He'll come after you with everything he's got, and when he does, you're going to need help." Dutch tilted his head toward the gully. "How many people you got with you?" "5, 6, half of them civilians, I'm guessing." "Thorn's got 20 men, all armed, all loyal, because he pays better than anyone else in the territory. You're outgunned, outmanned, and you're running out of time. Why do you care?" Dutch's expression went cold, and for the first time Sam saw something dangerous beneath the casual exterior. "Because Thorn killed my family, and I'm going to watch him hang one way or another." The words hung in the frozen air, heavy with old grief and older rage. Sam had heard that tone before, in the voices of men who'd lost everything and had nothing left but vengeance. It was a tone that couldn't be reasoned with, couldn't be bargained with. It simply was. "Tell me," Sam said quietly. Dutch looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but not here. If I can track you, Thorn's men can too. Let's get your people moving, find someplace defensible, and I'll tell you the whole story." Sam considered, then made a decision. He didn't trust Dutch. Brennan didn't know him well enough to trust him, but he believed him. Believed the grief, believed the hatred, believed that Dutch had his own reasons for wanting Thorn dead. And right now, Sam needed allies more than he needed certainty. "Follow me," Sam said. They returned to the gully where Rose and the others waited with weapons drawn. Robert had his blacksmith's hammer raised like a club, and Hannah clutched a small pistol that looked like it might fall apart if she fired it. Rose held a skinning knife, and her eyes were hard. "Who's this?" Rose demanded. "Dutch Brennan," Sam said. "He's a tracker. Says he's got a grudge against Thorn." "Says," Rose repeated. "You believe him?" "Enough to let him ride with us. If he tries anything, we've got him outnumbered." Dutch raised an eyebrow at that, his almost smile returning. "Comforting." They remounted, Dutch falling in beside Sam, and they rode south again, faster now, pushing the horses harder. Dutch led them to a cluster of ruins, an old cavalry outpost abandoned years ago, its walls crumbling, but still standing. They took shelter inside, built a small fire in what had once been a barracks, and Dutch finally told his story. 15 years ago, Dutch Brennan had been a young man, newly married, stationed with the cavalry at Fort Lowell in Arizona Territory. His wife, Ayanna, was Apache from a band that had negotiated peace with the U.S. government and lived on treaty land near the fort. They had 2 children, a boy and a girl, And Dutch had believed foolishly. He said that the treaty meant something, that peace was possible. Then gold was discovered. It was a small deposit, barely worth the effort, but it was on treaty land, and that made it valuable. The mining companies wanted it. The territorial governor wanted it. And the military, which was supposed to protect the treaty, decided that protecting it was less profitable than breaking it. Orders came down from the top, clear the land. The official story was that the Apache had violated the treaty, had raided a supply wagon, had killed a settler's family. None of it was true, but truth didn't matter. What mattered was that the land needed to be emptied, and the cavalry was the tool to do it. Dutch was away on patrol when it happened. His unit, led by a young lieutenant named Wade Thorne, rode into the Apache settlement at dawn. They didn't negotiate. They didn't warn. They just started killing. Men, women, children. 73 people died in less than an hour. The cavalry burned the lodges, scattered the livestock, and salted the earth so nothing would grow. When Dutch returned 3 days later, what he found were ashes and graves. His wife, his children, gone. Dutch's voice was flat as he told the story, empty of emotion, as if he'd burned through grief long ago, and all that remained was a cold, hollow rage. Sam listened, and something in his chest tightened. He'd known the cavalry had committed atrocities everyone knew, even if no one talked about it, but hearing it spoken aloud in the voice of a man who'd lived through it made it real in a way that reports and rumors never could. Thorne led the massacre, Dutch said. He was the one who gave the order to kill everyone. No prisoners, no mercy. I tried to get justice, filed complaints, demanded an investigation, wrote letters to every congressman I could name. But the massacre had been ordered by Captain Edmund Whitmore, who's now the mayor of Cottonwood Ridge. Whitmore made sure the whole thing got buried. Thorne got promoted to sheriff, and I got dishonorably discharged for conduct unbecoming. Rose, sitting across the fire, looked stricken. Thorne killed your family and got rewarded for it. That's how it works when you have got the right friends, Dutch said. He spat into the fire, the gesture contemptuous. Whitmore protected Thorne because Thorne knew where the bodies were buried, literally. If Thorne talked, Whitmore would hang. So they protect each other, and men like me get nothing. Sam felt a sick recognition settle in his gut. This was Emma all over again. The same corrupt system, the same powerful men shielding each other, the same hollow promises that justice would come. Only this time the crime was so much worse, and the cover-up had lasted 15 years. "Why didn't you kill him yourself?" Rose asked quietly. Dutch looked at her, and his expression was almost gentle. "Because I wanted it done right. I wanted him to stand trial, wanted the world to know what he did, wanted his name destroyed before his body was. If I'd shot him in an alley, he'd have died a hero. I want him to die a villain." "Then help us," Sam said. "We've got evidence that Lucas Whitmore stole the bread and framed Rose. We've got a witness who'll testify. If we can get this to Fort Grant, we can force an investigation. And if we investigate Lucas, we investigate his father. And if we investigate Edmund Whitmore, we dig up the massacre," Dutch finished. His eyes gleamed. "And Thorne goes down with him." "Exactly." Dutch leaned back, considering. "All right, I'm in. But you need to know what you're up against. Thorne's not going to let you reach Fort Grant. He'll ride you down, kill you, and bury this so deep no one will ever find it. We need a plan." "I'm listening." "First, we need to split up. Too many people, too easy to track. Send the civilians ahead to Fort Grant with an escort. The rest of us, you, me, the girl, we draw Thorne's attention, lead him away. Buy time for the others to reach safety." "I'm not leaving Timothy," Rose said immediately. "You don't have a choice," Dutch said, not unkindly. "If Thorne catches us, he'll kill everyone. You want the boy safe, you send him ahead." Rose's jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. She knew Dutch was right. "Second," Dutch continued, "we need to make Thorne come to us. Find a place we can defend, set a trap, and when he shows up, we make sure he doesn't leave." "You want to ambush a sheriff and 20 armed men," Robert said, incredulous. "That's suicide." "It's smart," Dutch corrected. "Thorne's used to intimidating people. He's not used to people fighting back. If we pick the ground, if we prepare properly, we can even the odds." Sam considered the plan, weighed the risks. It was dangerous, reckless, and it might get them all killed. But Dutch was right about one thing: running wouldn't work. Thorne would catch them eventually, and when he did, it would be on his terms, not theirs. Where? Sam asked. Dutch pulled out a folded map, spread it on the ground, and pointed to a spot 30 miles south. Here, old mission ruins. Stone walls, good sight lines, only one approach. If we fortify it, we can hold off 20 men long enough for reinforcements to arrive. What reinforcements? Fort Grant, we send a rider ahead, tell them we're pinned down by a corrupt sheriff, ask for military intervention. If we can hold out for 2 days, maybe 3, they'll come. And if they don't, Dutch's almost smile returned, then we die knowing we made Thorne bleed. Sam looked around the fire, saw the exhaustion in Hannah's eyes, the fear in Daniel's, the determination in Rose's. These were civilians, not soldiers, and he was about to drag them into a war. But the alternative was worse. Let Thorne win, let the system grind on unchallenged, let more girls hang and more families burn. All right, Sam said. We do it Dutch's way. They divided the group that evening. Robert, Hannah, and Daniel would ride to Fort Grant with the ledger and Hannah's written testimony along with one of the horses and enough supplies to reach the fort. Sam gave Robert a letter addressed to Colonel Harrington explaining the situation and requesting immediate assistance. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. Rose hugged Daniel goodbye and the boy clung to her, crying softly. She whispered something in his ear that Sam couldn't hear, then pulled away and turned her face so no one would see her tears. Hannah embraced her father and Robert held her for a long moment, his expression grim. You come back, Robert said to his daughter. I will, Papa. Sam watched them ride off into the dusk, 3 small figures disappearing into the snow, and felt a familiar weight settle on his shoulders. He'd just sent civilians into danger, trusted that they'd reach safety, bet their lives on a plan that might not work. It was the kind of gamble that kept him awake at night, the kind that haunted him when it went wrong. But this time he told himself it would go right. It had to. Dutch, Sam, and Rose spent the night preparing. They rode hard for the mission ruins, arriving just before dawn. The structure was older than the cavalry outpost built by Spanish missionaries a century ago and abandoned when the Apache drove them out. The walls were thick stone, weathered but solid, and the main building still had most of its roof. There was a courtyard, a bell tower that had partially collapsed, and a well that might still hold water. Dutch walked the perimeter assessing defensibility, while Sam and Rose unloaded supplies. They had 3 rifles, 2 pistols, ammunition, dried food, and blankets. Enough to survive a few days, maybe longer, if they rationed. This'll work, Dutch said, returning from his inspection. We barricade the main entrance post, a lookout in the bell tower, and keep the horses inside the courtyard. When Thorne shows up, we make him come through the choke point, pick off his men one at a time. How long before he finds us? Rose asked. He's already tracking us. I'd say we've got it 12 hours, maybe less. Then we'd better get to work. They spent the morning fortifying the mission. Dutch and Sam hauled stones to block the main gate, leaving only a narrow gap that would force attackers to funnel through single file. Rose climbed into the bell tower and set up a sniper position, testing sight lines and marking distances. Sam dug a fire pit in the courtyard and made sure they had clean water from the well. By midday, they were as ready as they'd ever be. Sam stood in the courtyard, surveyed their defenses, and felt a grim satisfaction. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of time, but they weren't helpless. They'd chosen the battlefield, and that meant something. Dutch joined him, chewing on a piece of jerky. You ever been in a siege before, Marshal? Once, Indian Territory 20 years back. We held off a Comanche raiding party for 3 days before reinforcements arrived. How many men did you lose? 4 out of 12. Dutch nodded as if the numbers confirmed something he had already suspected. Thorne's going to try to burn us out. Stone won't catch, but he'll fire the roof, fill the place with smoke, force us into the open. So we put out the fire. With what? We've got 1 bucket in a well that might be dry. Then we make sure he doesn't get close enough to light it. Dutch spat into the dirt. You're an optimist, Marshal. I like that. They ate a cold meal, no fire, no smoke to give away their position, and waited. The sun crawled across the sky, pale and distant, and the wind picked up, carrying the smell of snow. Rose stayed in the bell tower, watching the northern horizon, and Sam cleaned his weapons methodically, a ritual that calmed his nerves. Dutch sat cross-legged on the ground, sharpening his knife with a whetstone. The sound was rhythmic, almost meditative, and Sam found himself watching the tracker's hands, the careful precision of each stroke. You regret it yet? Dutch asked without looking up. Regret what? Cutting her down, throwing away your badge, becoming a fugitive. Sam thought about it, really thought about it. A week ago, he'd been 3 weeks from retirement, a comfortable cabin, and a life of quiet obscurity. Now he was holed up in a ruin waiting for a corrupt sheriff to try to kill him, and his name was probably on wanted posters across the territory. No, Sam said. I don't regret it. Why not? Because I spent 32 years doing things the right way, and the right way let my daughter die. I'm not doing that again. Dutch looked at him then, and something passed between them, an understanding maybe, or recognition that they were both men shaped by loss and driven by the need to make it mean something. Your daughter, Dutch said. What happened? Sam told him. Not the whole story. Just the essentials, Emma. The hired guns. The trial that went nowhere. The system that protected killers and punished the innocent. Dutch listened without interrupting, and when Sam finished, the tracker nodded slowly. The law's a weapon, Dutch said. And like any weapon, it works for whoever's holding it. Right now, men like Thorne and Whitmore are holding it. But weapons can change hands. That's what we're doing here, Sam said. Taking it back. Or breaking it so no one can use it. Sam didn't answer. Because Dutch was right, there was a difference between reforming a system and destroying it, and Sam wasn't sure which one they were doing. Maybe both. Maybe it didn't matter as long as Rose lived and Thorne faced justice. The sun set and the temperature dropped, and they huddled in the mission's main hall wrapped in blankets, weapons close at hand. Rose descended from the bell tower for the first time all day, her face pinched with cold, and Sam made her drink hot water from the well. Anything? Sam asked. Nothing yet, but I saw dust on the horizon about an hour ago. Could be wind, could be riders. How far? 10 miles, maybe. If it's Thorne, he'll be here by dawn. Sam nodded. It was faster than he'd hoped, but not unexpected. Thorne had the advantage of numbers and fresh horses, and he'd been tracking them since they left Cottonwood Ridge. The only surprise was that he'd taken this long. Get some sleep, Sam said to Rose. I'll take first watch. I'm not tired. You're exhausted. Sleep. That's an order. Rose started to argue, then saw the look on Sam's face and relented. She curled up near the fire pit, wrapped in a blanket, and within minutes, she was asleep. Sam watched her breathe, watched the rise and fall of her shoulders, and felt something protective and fierce settle in his chest. He'd failed Emma, but he wouldn't fail Rose. Dutch joined him at the barricade, and they stood together in the dark, listening to the wind. After a while, Dutch spoke, his voice quiet. You remind me of someone. Who tata? Myself. 15 years ago, before I learned that wanting justice and getting it are two different things. You think I'm going to fail? I think you're going to try, Mo, and that's more than most people do. Sam didn't know if that was encouragement or warning, so he said nothing. They stood watch through the night, and when the first gray light of dawn crept over the horizon, Dutch pointed. There. Sam followed his gesture and saw them riders 20 or more moving in a loose formation across the plain. They were still miles away, but they were coming fast, and at their head rode a tall figure on a black horse, Wade Thorne. The siege had begun. Thorne's men arrived an hour after dawn, and they didn't bother with subtlety. They rode straight up to the mission's outer wall, stopped just outside rifle range, and dismounted. Sam watched from the bell tower where he'd relieved Rose and counted heads. 23 men, all armed with rifles or pistols, and 3 of them carried torches. Thorne sat his horse at the front, surveying the ruins with the calm of a man who'd done this before. He didn't shout, didn't issue ultimatums. He just waited, and the waiting was more unnerving than any threat. Dutch stood in the courtyard below, his rifle in hand, and called up to Sam. What's he doing? Thinking. He knows we're in here, knows we're dug in. He's deciding how to play it. He'll try to talk first, offer terms, see if we're stupid enough to negotiate. Are we? Hell no. Sam climbed down from the tower and joined Dutch and Rose at the barricade. Rose's face was pale, but her hands were steady on her rifle, and Sam saw the same determination he'd seen the night he cut her down. She'd been terrified then, but she wasn't terrified now. She was angry. Thorne dismounted, handed his reins to one of his men, and walked toward the mission alone. He stopped 50 feet from the barricade well within rifle range and raised his hands to show he was unarmed. Marshal Hartwell, Thorne called. His voice carried easily in the cold air, smooth and confident. I know you're in there. Let's talk. Sam stepped up to the gap in the barricade, visible but protected. We've got nothing to talk about, Thorne. I disagree. You've got something that belongs to me, a fugitive, and stolen property. Return them and I'll let you walk away. No charges, no pursuit. You can retire peacefully, just like you planned. The girl didn't steal anything. You know that. I know she was convicted by a jury of her peers. I know you interfered with a lawful execution, and I know you're harboring a criminal. Lucas Whitmore is the criminal, Sam said. We've got the ledger that proves it. We've got a witness who saw him steal the bread, and we're taking it to Fort Grant where the military will investigate. You can't stop that. Thorne's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, surprise maybe, or calculation. You've been busy, Marshal, but it doesn't matter. Whatever evidence you think you have, it won't hold up. Lucas made a mistake, I'll grant you that. But his father is the mayor, and mayors have resources. Lawyers, judges, friends in high places. By the time this goes to trial, if it goes to trial, your evidence will be inadmissible. Your witness will recant, and you'll be the one facing charges. Then I guess we'll see what happens at trial, Sam said. Thorne sighed as if disappointed. I was hoping you'd be reasonable, but I see you're determined to make this difficult. He turned and walked back toward his men, then stopped and looked over his shoulder. You've got 1 hour to surrender. After that, we come in. And when we do, Marshal, I won't be offering terms again. He mounted his horse and rode back to his men, and Sam watched him go, his pulse steady, his mind racing. Thorne was confident, too confident. He knew something Sam didn't, and that worried him more than the numbers or the weapons. He's bluffing, Dutch said. He doesn't have lawyers or judges out here. He's trying to scare you into giving up. Maybe, or maybe he's telling the truth. Whitmore's got connections. If this goes to trial in a territorial court instead of a military one, we might lose. Then we make sure it doesn't go to a territorial court, Rose said. We hold out until Fort Grant sends reinforcements, and we make sure Thorne doesn't walk away from this. Sam looked at her, saw the steel in her eyes, and realized she'd changed. The terrified girl on the scaffolding was gone, replaced by someone harder. Someone who'd learned that survival meant fighting back. He wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a tragedy, but he knew it was necessary. All right, Sam said, we hold, no matter what. Thorne gave them exactly 1 hour, and then the assault began. It started with gunfire, not aimed, just suppressing fire bullets, slamming into the stone walls and kicking up dust. Sam, Dutch, and Rose crouched behind the barricade, waiting for the real attack. It came 5 minutes later, 3 men with torches sprinting toward the mission, trying to reach the main gate and set it on fire. Dutch took the first one down with a single rifle shot clean through the chest. The man dropped his torch, rolling away into the snow. Sam shot the second, caught him in the leg, and the man screamed and fell, clutching his thigh. The third made it to the gate, lit the wood, and turned to run. Rose fired, and the bullet took him in the back. He went down hard, didn't move. The wood of the barricade began to burn, and Sam cursed. They'd expected this, but seeing it happen was different. The flames were small at first, just licking at the edges, but they'd spread fast if they weren't put out. Rose the well, Sam shouted. Rose ran to the courtyard, lowered the bucket into the well, and hauled it up. The water sloshed as she carried it back, and she threw it onto the flames. They hissed, sputtered, but didn't die. Sam grabbed a blanket, soaked it in the next bucket, and smothered the fire until it finally went out. But the assault didn't stop. Thorne's men split into 2 groups, flanking the mission from opposite sides, trying to find weak points in the walls. Dutch climbed back into the bell tower and started picking off anyone who got too close, his shots precise and economical. Sam and Rose held the main gate, firing through gaps in the barricade, and the air filled with the crack of rifles and the smell of gunpowder. An hour into the fight, Sam's side began to ache, a deep, throbbing pain where he'd been shot years ago. The kind of old injury that never fully healed. He ignored it, kept firing, kept reloading, but he could feel his movements slowing, his aim wavering. Rose noticed. You're hurt. I'm fine. You're not. Let me. A bullet smashed into the wall inches from her head, and she ducked reflexively. Sam pulled her down, shielded her with his body, and returned fire. He hit one of Thorne's men in the shoulder, saw the man spin and fall, and felt a cold satisfaction. But they were losing. Not the fight, not yet, but the war of attrition. Thorne had more men, more ammunition, and all the time in the world. Sam, Dutch, and Rose were running low on bullets, running low on energy, and the walls that had seemed so solid this morning were starting to feel like a trap. Dutch descended from the tower, his face streaked with sweat and gunpowder residue. We need to thin their numbers. If we keep fighting defensively, they'll just wait us out. What do you suggest? A sortie. Hit them hard fast, force them to scatter. I'll take the lead. You cover me. That's suicide. Maybe, but it's better than sitting here and dying slow. Sam wanted to argue, but Dutch was right. They couldn't win by defense alone. They had to take the fight to Thorne, disrupt his plans, make him second-guess himself. It was reckless, dangerous, and exactly what they needed to do. I'll go with you, Sam said. No, you stay here with Rose. If I don't quite make it back, you hold this place until Fort Grant arrives. Dutch, this isn't a debate, Marshal. This is how it's going to be. Dutch checked his rifle, loaded his pistol, and moved to the barricade. He looked back at Sam, once nodded, and then vaulted over the stones and charged into the open. Sam watched him go, and for a moment time seemed to slow. He saw Dutch sprint toward Thorne's line, saw the bullets kick up snow around his feet, saw him dive behind a low ridge and return fire. 3 of Thorne's men went down, then 4. Dutch was moving like a ghost, fast and unpredictable, and the enemy broke formation, confused, trying to track him. Sam and Rose provided cover, firing at anyone who got too close to Dutch, and for a few glorious minutes it looked like the plan might work. Then Dutch went down. It wasn't dramatic. No cry, no flourish. One moment he was running, and the next he was on the ground, clutching his shoulder blood, spreading across his buckskin shirt. Sam's heart stopped. Cover me, Sam shouted to Rose, and before she could protest, he was over the barricade and running. The world narrowed to the space between him and Dutch. Bullets whined past close enough that Sam felt the displacement of air, but he didn't stop. He reached Dutch, grabbed him by the collar, and dragged him back toward the mission. Dutch was conscious, groaning, his face pale with shock, and Sam could see the wound, a bullet through the shoulder, high and clean, but bleeding badly. They made it back to the barricade, and Rose pulled Dutch over, while Sam fired blindly at Thorne's men, buying them seconds. Dutch collapsed in the courtyard, and Sam dropped beside him, pressing a hand against the wound to slow the bleeding. How bad? Dutch gasped. You'll live, but you're done fighting. Like hell. Sam didn't argue. He bandaged the wound with strips torn from Dutch's shirt, tied it tight, and helped him sit up against the wall. Dutch's face was gray, his breathing shallow, but his eyes were still sharp, still defiant. You're a damn fool, Marshal, Dutch said. So I've been told. The assault paused, and Sam used the lull to reload weapons and check their ammunition. They were down to 30 rounds, maybe less. At this rate, they'd be out of bullets by nightfall. How long until Fort Grant sends help? Rose asked. If Robert made it, if Harrington believed him, if they dispatched a unit immediately, 2 days, maybe 3. We don't have 3 days. I know. They sat in silence, listening to the wind and the distant murmur of Thorne's men regrouping. Sam's side throbbed, Dutch's shoulder bled through the bandage, and Rose looked like she was holding herself together by sheer force of will. And outside, Wade Thorne waited, patient and inevitable. The sun began to set, and Sam knew the real fight was just beginning. Night fell like a judgment. The temperature plummeted, and the wind turned savage, howling through the mission ruins with a sound like something dying. Sam huddled in the courtyard with Dutch and Rose, conserving what little body heat they had left. The fire they'd built was small, barely enough to see by, and they couldn't risk making it larger. Smoke would give away their exact position, make them easier targets when Thorne's next assault came. And it would come. Sam had no illusions about that. Dutch sat propped against the stone wall, his shoulder wrapped in blood-soaked bandages. The bleeding had slowed, but the tracker's face was ashen. His breathing labored. Sam had seen enough bullet wounds to know this one was serious, not immediately fatal, but Dutch needed a doctor, needed proper care, needed things they didn't have. How many rounds left? Dutch asked, his voice rough. Sam did a quick count of their remaining ammunition, and the number made his stomach turn. 23 rifle rounds, 14 pistol. That's everything. Thorne's got to have 100 times that. At least. Rose fed another stick into the fire, watched the flames catch. Her hands were steady, but Sam saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the way her shoulders sagged. She'd been running on fear and adrenaline for days, and both were finite resources. We're not going to make it, are we? She said quietly. Sam wanted to lie, wanted to offer false hope, but he'd never been good at lying. Not if we stay here. Thorne can wait us out, starve us, or just keep shooting until we run out of bullets to shoot back. The only chance we have is if Fort Grant sends help. How long has it been since Robert left? 2 days. Call it 50 miles to the fort. Time to convince Harrington, time to mobilize troops if everything went perfectly. We're looking at another day, maybe two. We don't have 2 days, Dutch said. He shifted Wince, pressed a hand to his wounded shoulder. We've got tonight, maybe tomorrow morning. After that, Thorne will realize we're not shooting back and he'll walk right in. Silence settled over them, heavy and suffocating. Sam stared into the fire and thought about Emma, about all the times he'd trusted the system to save them, and the system had failed. He'd thrown away his badge cut down. Rose fought his way here, and for what? To die in a forgotten ruin while the men who'd killed Emma, who'd massacred Dutch's family, who'd hanged innocent girls walked free and unpunished. No. Sam had made too many compromises, swallowed too much injustice, buried too much rage. If he was going to die here, he was going to die fighting, and he was going to take Wade Thorne with him. There's another option, Sam said slowly. Dutch looked at him, eyes sharp despite the pain. I'm listening. We go out there, all three of us. We don't wait for them to come to us. We bring the fight to them. Hit them fast, hit them hard, and we don't stop until Thorne is dead, or we are. Rose stared at him. That's insane. Maybe, but it's better than dying here like rats in a trap. You're wounded. Dutch can barely stand. I've never been in a real fight in my life. We wouldn't last 10 seconds. Then we make those 10 seconds count. Dutch laughed a harsh, painful sound. I knew I liked you, Marshall. You've got the same kind of stupid courage that gets men killed and legends made. He tried to stand, grunted, and fell back against the wall. But the girl's right. I'm useless. I can barely hold a rifle, let alone run and shoot. You two go. I'll stay here. Cover your retreat. Make sure Thorne thinks we're still dug in. I'm not leaving you, Sam said. You don't have a choice. I'm dead weight and you know it. Leave me a rifle and 10 rounds. I'll hold them off as long as I can. By the time they realize you're gone, you'll have a head start. A head start to where we're in the middle of nowhere. Thorne's got horses, fresh men, and he knows this territory better than we do. Then you make for Fort Grant. 50 miles, you said. You and Rose can cover that in 2 days if you push hard. Find Harrington, bring back the cavalry, and make sure my family's story gets told. Sam started to argue, but Dutch cut him off with a raised hand. Listen to me, Marshall. I've been hunting Wade Thorne for 15 years. I've tracked him, studied him, learned everything there is to know about how he thinks. And I know this, he won't stop until Rose is dead and you're disgraced. The only way to beat him is to take the fight somewhere he can't control. Fort Grant, a military tribunal, a place where money and corruption don't reach. You can't do that if you're stuck here with a dying man. Rose's voice was small, choked. You're not dying. Dutch smiled at her, and it was gentle, almost paternal. We're all dying, girl. Some of us just do it faster than others. He looked at Sam. Take her, run. And when you get to Fort Grant, you make sure that son of a bitch hangs. Sam held Dutch's gaze for a long moment, and 1,000 unspoken things passed between them. Respect, grief, the shared understanding of men who'd lost everything and found purpose in revenge. Finally, Sam nodded. We'll make him hang, Sam said. I promise. Good. Dutch settled back against the wall, closed his eyes. Now get out of here before I change my mind. They left an hour before dawn when the night was at its darkest, and Thorne's men were cold and tired and less vigilant. Sam and Rose moved like shadows, slipping through a gap in the mission's back wall that Dutch had scouted earlier. They left their horses, the animals would make too much noise, and went on foot, carrying only what they could run, with 1 rifle, 2 pistols, a canteen of water, and the folded ledger tucked into Sam's coat. Behind them, Dutch fired 3 space shots from the bell tower, making it seem like the mission was still defended. The shots echoed across the plain, and Sam heard shouting from Thorne's camp, heard men scrambling to return fire. It was a desperate bluff, but it might buy them an hour, maybe 2. They ran south away from the mission, away from Thorne, and the frozen ground was hard and unforgiving under Sam's boots. His old wound ached with every step, a deep, grinding pain that radiated from his side into his hip and down his leg. He ignored it, pushed through it, focused on putting distance between them and Thorne. Rose ran beside him, her breathing ragged but steady, and Sam was struck again by how much she'd changed. The girl he'd cut down from the gallows would have collapsed by now, would have begged to stop, would have given up. But Rose kept moving, kept her eyes forward, and when Sam stumbled over a hidden rock, she caught his arm and steadied him without a word. They ran until the mission was a dark smudge on the horizon, and then they ran some more. When the sun finally broke over the eastern ridge, painting the snow in shades of gold and orange, they stopped to catch their breath. Sam bent double, gasping, his lungs burning from the cold air. Rose leaned against a tree, her face flushed, her hands shaking. "How far?" she managed. Sam scanned their surroundings, tried to orient himself. They were in broken country, now low hills and scattered pine forests, the kind of terrain that made tracking difficult. Good for them, bad for anyone following. 5 miles, maybe 6. Not enough. "Will Dutch be all right?" Sam didn't answer because he didn't have a good answer. Dutch was wounded, outnumbered, and surrounded by men who wanted him dead. The odds weren't good. But Dutch had chosen this, had volunteered to stay behind so Sam and Rose could escape, and Sam owed it to him to make that sacrifice matter. "We keep moving," Sam said. "Fort Grant is still 40-some miles south. If we can cover 20 miles today, we'll be close enough that Harrington's patrols might spot us. And if they don't, then we keep moving until they do." They walked through the morning, conserving energy now, and Sam's mind kept circling back to the mission, to Dutch alone in the bell tower, to the sound of gunfire that would eventually stop. He tried not to think about what that silence would mean. Around midday, they crested a hill, and Sam saw something that made his blood run cold. Riders. 7 of them, maybe a mile behind, moving fast. Thorne had sent a pursuit party. Sam and Rose ran again, but this time they were running from something, not just towards safety, and the difference was crushing. The riders were fresh mounted and gaining fast. Sam and Rose were on foot, exhausted and running out of places to hide. They made it another 2 miles before the riders closed to rifle range. Sam heard the crack of a shot, saw snow explode 10 feet to his right, and knew they were out of time. There, Rose pointed to a cluster of boulders ahead, a natural formation that would offer some cover. They sprinted for it, threw themselves behind the rocks just as another shot rang out. This one hit the boulder inches from Sam's head, and stone chips sprayed across his face. Sam drew his rifle, checked the load, 6 rounds, and peered over the boulder. The riders had dismounted and spread out, advancing in a skirmish line. They were professionals, moving with the coordination of men who'd done this before, and at their center was a figure Sam recognized even at this distance: Lucas Whitmore. Not Thorne, Lucas. That was almost worse. Thorne was a killer, but he was disciplined, tactical. Lucas was desperate, reckless, and desperate men made mistakes. They also didn't take prisoners. "How many bullets do we have?" Rose asked. Sam did a quick inventory. 10 rifle, 8 pistol. 7 men. We might be able to. "No," Sam cut her off. "We can't win a stand-up fight. We hold them off long enough to break contact, then we run again. They'll just follow. Then we make them pay for it." Sam took aim at the nearest rider, a lean man with a rifle who was moving too confidently, and fired. The shot took the man in the chest, and he went down hard. The other riders scattered, dove for cover, and Sam used the confusion to pull Rose to her feet. "Move!" They ran zigzagging between boulders and trees, and bullets chased them, whining past like angry hornets. Sam fired twice more, not aiming, just trying to keep the riders' heads down, and then his rifle clicked empty. He dropped it, no time to reload, and drew his Colt. They made it another 100 yards before Rose cried out and fell. Sam's heart stopped. He skidded to a halt, turned, and saw Rose on the ground, clutching her ankle. For a terrible moment, he thought she'd been shot, but then he saw the problem she'd stepped in. A hidden dip in the snow twisted her ankle badly, and now she couldn't put weight on it. "Can you walk?" Sam asked, kneeling beside her. "I can try." She gasped when she tried to stand, her face going white with pain. No, I can't." Behind them, the riders were closing fast. Sam could hear Lucas shouting orders, hear the crunch of boots on snow. They had maybe 30 seconds before the riders were on top of them. Sam made a decision. He scooped Rose into his arms, ignored her protest, and ran. She was light, too light, but carrying her slowed him down, made him clumsy, and he knew he couldn't keep this up for long. His wounded side screamed with every step, and his vision started to blur at the edges. They weren't going to make it. Sam saw a shallow ravine ahead, barely deep enough to hide in, and he half ran, half fell into it, landing hard with Rose in his arms. He set her down, gently drew his pistol, and turned to face their pursuers. 6 men appeared at the ravine's edge, rifles leveled, and Lucas Whitmore stood at the center, a savage grin on his face. He was younger than Sam had expected, mid-20s maybe, with the kind of soft features that suggested he'd never had to fight for anything in his life. His clothes were expensive, his rifle new and well-maintained, and he carried himself with the arrogance of someone who'd always had his father's money to protect him. "End of the line, Marshal," Lucas called down. "Drop the gun." Sam didn't move. His Colt was pointed at Lucas's chest, and at this range he wouldn't miss. But Lucas had 6 men with rifles, and Sam had 8 bullets. The math didn't work. "You know who I am," Lucas continued. "I'm the man you've been trying to destroy, the man whose reputation you've been smearing with lays and forged ledgers." "That ledger's real," Sam said. "You stole 100 loaves of bread, framed Rose for it, and tried to have her hanged to cover your tracks. Prove it." "We will, at trial." Lucas laughed. "There's not going to be a trial, Marshal. You're going to die here in this ravine, along with your little vagrant. And when my father writes the report, it'll say you were killed resisting arrest, a tragic end to a once honorable career." "Your father's going to hang," Sam said. "Him and Thorne both. We know about the massacre. We know Edmund Whitmore ordered it, and we know Wade Thorne carried it out. When Fort Grant hears about this—" "Fort Grant isn't coming," Lucas interrupted. "You think we're stupid. My father sent riders to intercept anyone heading south. Your friend's the blacksmith and his daughter, they never made it to the fort. They're in a jail cell in Cottonwood right now, waiting to be charged as accomplices." The words hit Sam like a physical blow. Robert, Hannah, Daniel, captured. The ledger they carried the testimony, Hannah had written all of it in Whitmore's hands now, which meant there was no cavalry coming, no military intervention, no justice waiting at Fort Grant. They'd lost. Sam's hand wavered, and he saw Lucas's grin widen. The young man took a step forward, confident, victorious, and Sam knew that in another second, Lucas would give the order to fire and it would be over. But then Rose moved. She'd been lying still, clutching her ankle, but now she rolled, pulled a small pistol from inside her coat. Hannah's pistol, the one Sam hadn't realized she'd taken, and fired. The shot was wild panic, but it hit one of Lucas's men in the shoulder. The man screamed, fell, and chaos erupted. Sam didn't hesitate. He fired 3 times in rapid succession, dropping 2 more men, and then he grabbed Rose and hauled her up the opposite side of the ravine. Bullets tore into the ground around them, but they were moving, scrambling, and Lucas's remaining men were too disorganized to aim properly. They made it over the ravine's edge and into a thick stand of pines, and Sam kept pulling Rose forward, half dragging her through the snow. Behind them, Lucas was shouting furious, and Sam heard boots pounding as the pursuit resumed. But something had changed. The riders were no longer confident, no longer coordinated. Rose's shot had rattled them, and Sam's quick kills had made them cautious. They were still following, but they were following slowly, and that gave Sam and Rose precious seconds. They stumbled through the forest, and Sam's mind raced. They couldn't run forever. They couldn't fight. They couldn't even hide. Lucas would track them, find them, finish what he'd started. But maybe they didn't need to do any of those things. Maybe they just needed to survive until someone else arrived. Because Lucas had made a mistake. He'd said Robert and Hannah were in jail, which meant they were alive. And if they were alive in Cottonwood, it meant Whitmore hadn't killed them yet, which meant he was hesitating, which meant there was still a chance someone in that town might push back. Sam just had to buy enough time for that chance to matter. They found shelter in a hollow beneath a fallen tree, barely big enough for both of them to squeeze into. Sam pulled Rose inside, covered the entrance with branches, and they waited, listening to Lucas's men search the forest. Rose's breathing was labored, her face pale with pain and exhaustion. Sam checked her ankle, swollen, possibly sprained, but not broken. She'd be able to walk eventually, but not now, not fast enough to outrun mounted men. "I'm sorry," Rose whispered. "For what?" "For slowing you down, for getting caught, for—" "Stop." Sam's voice was firm but gentle. "You saved my life back there. If you hadn't shot that man, Lucas would have killed us both. I didn't even aim. I just pulled the trigger. Doesn't matter. You acted when it counted, and that's more than most people ever do." Rose was quiet for a moment, then, "What do we do now?" Sam didn't have a good answer. They were trapped, injured, outnumbered, and the cavalry wasn't coming. Every plan he'd made, every hope he'd held on to had collapsed. But Sam had spent 32 years learning that hope wasn't a strategy and faith in the system was a luxury he couldn't afford. So he'd do what he'd always done, improvise, adapt, and keep moving forward until there was nowhere left to go. "We wait," Sam said. "Let them search. When they give up, when they think we've moved on, we double back, head north instead of south." "North, that's toward Cottonwood." "Exactly. Lucas said Robert and Hannah are in jail there. If we can break them out, if we can get that ledger back, we still have a chance." "You want to break into a jail in a town controlled by the man who wants us dead? You have a better idea." Rose didn't answer because they both knew she didn't. This was insane, reckless, and probably suicidal. But it was the only move they had left. Outside, Lucas's men crashed through the forest, cursing and shouting, and Sam pressed a finger to his lips. They waited in the hollow, barely breathing, as boots crunched past their hiding spot so close Sam could have reached out and touched them. But the men didn't look down, didn't think to check beneath the fallen tree, and after an eternity, the sounds of pursuit faded into the distance. Sam waited another hour to be sure, then helped Rose out of the hollow. Her ankle was worse now, swollen to twice its normal size, and she bit back a cry when she tried to put weight on it. "I can't walk," she said, her voice thick with frustration and pain. "Then I'll carry you." "You can't carry me all the way to Cottonwood. You'll kill yourself." "Probably, but I'm not leaving you here." Sam lifted her again, and this time she didn't protest. They moved slowly, carefully retracing their steps through the forest, and Sam's body screamed at him with every step. His side felt like someone was driving a hot poker into his ribs. His legs trembled with exhaustion, and his vision kept blurring at the edges, but he didn't stop. He thought about Emma, about Dutch, about all the people who died because he trusted the system instead of fighting for them. He thought about Rose, barely 20 years old, who'd risked her life to feed a starving child and been condemned to hang for it. And he kept walking. They reached the edge of the forest just as the sun began to set, and Sam saw Cottonwood Ridge in the distance, a dark smudge against the horizon, smoke rising from chimneys, lanterns beginning to glow in windows. From here, it looked peaceful, ordinary, a town like any other. But Sam knew better. He knew what waited there: Wade Thorne, Edmund, Whitmore, Lucas, and his hired guns. He knew the odds were impossible. The plan was insane, and he was probably going to die. But he also knew that if he didn't try, if he didn't fight back, then Emma's death would mean nothing. Dutch's sacrifice would mean nothing, and Rose would die without ever seeing justice. So Sam Hartwell, U.S. Marshal. No ex-marshal, he reminded himself, adjusted his grip on Rose, took a deep breath, and started walking toward Cottonwood Ridge, toward the town that wanted him dead, toward the fight he couldn't win, toward justice or vengeance or whatever passed for either in a world where the law protected killers and hanged the innocent. They reached the outskirts of Cottonwood after midnight, and the town was quiet. Most windows dark, only a few lanterns burning in the saloon and the jail. Sam set Rose down behind an old storage shed, and they crouched in the shadows watching the jail's front door. Two guards stood outside, rifles in hand, and Sam recognized them as men who'd been at the mission part of Thorne's crew. They looked cold, bored, and underpaid, which meant they were vulnerable to distraction. "I need you to do something for me," Sam said quietly to Rose. "What?" "I need you to scream." Rose stared at him. "What?" "When I give the signal, you scream like you're being murdered. Loud as you can. Draw those guards away from the jail, make them think someone's in trouble. While they're distracted, I slip inside and get Robert and Hannah." "What about the guards inside?" "There's only one jailer on night duty. I can handle him." "And if you can't, then you run. Don't wait for me. Don't try to help. Just run, and don't stop until you're somewhere safe." Rose's jaw tightened. "I'm not leaving you." "Rose, I said I'm not leaving you." Her voice was steel. "You didn't leave me on that gallows. You didn't leave me at the mission. I'm not abandoning you now." Sam wanted to argue, but he saw the determination in her eyes and knew it would be pointless. Rose had made her choice, and she was going to live with it or die with it. "All right," Sam said, "but we do this smart. On my signal, you scream. The guards come running, I take them down quietly, then we go in together. Fast, quiet, and we don't stop for anything." "Understood." Rose nodded. Sam checked his pistol 4 rounds left and positioned himself near the corner of the shed. Rose moved to the opposite side, ready to scream. Sam counted to 3 silently, then nodded. Rose's scream split the night. It was raw, terrified, the sound of someone in mortal danger, and it cut through the quiet like a knife. The 2 guards jerked upright, exchanged a glance, and both of them moved toward the sound, rifles raised. Sam waited until they passed his hiding spot, then stepped out behind them. He brought the butt of his pistol down on the first guard's skull hard, and the man dropped like a stone. The second guard started to turn, but Sam was already moving, grabbed the man's rifle, wrenched it aside, and delivered a brutal knee to the gut. The guard folded, gasping, and Sam hit him with another blow to the head. He went down. Sam dragged both unconscious men into the shadows, then waved Rose forward. They moved to the jail's door and Sam tested the handle. Locked. He stepped back, aimed his pistol at the lock, and hesitated. A gunshot would wake the whole town. Rose pulled a hairpin from her hair, knelt by the lock, and started working it. Sam stared at her, impressed and bemused, and after 30 seconds, the lock clicked. "How did you—" "You don't survive on the streets without learning a few things," Rose said. They slipped inside. The jail was small, just a front room with a desk and a rack of rifles and a short hallway leading to 3 cells in the back. A single lantern burned on the desk, casting weak light across the room, and behind the desk sat the night jailer, a heavy-set man in his 50s, currently asleep in his chair, mouth open, snoring softly. Sam crossed the room, silently picked up the key ring from the desk and moved to the cells. In the first 2 cells, drunks snored on narrow cots. In the third, Robert, Hannah, and Daniel, all awake, all staring at him with wide, disbelieving eyes. Sam put a finger to his lips, unlocked the cell, and gestured for them to follow. They moved quietly, carefully, and they were almost to the door when the jailer woke. He saw them, blinked, started to shout. Sam crossed the room in 2 strides and hit the jailer hard enough to knock him out cold. The man slumped in his chair, and Sam turned to find Rose holding the jail's front door open. They fled into the night. They made it 3 blocks before the alarm bells started ringing. Someone had found the unconscious guards, or the jailer had woken, or maybe Lucas had posted lookouts. It didn't matter. The town erupted, lanterns flared to life, dogs barked, men poured out of houses with rifles and pistols, and Sam knew they had minutes, maybe seconds, before Thorne's men surrounded them. "Where?" Robert gasped, running beside Sam. "Church," Sam said. "Old one, eastern edge." It was the only place he could think of, the only building big enough to hold them and defensible enough to make a stand. They ran through dark alleys, stumbling over frozen trash and broken crates, and behind them the shouts grew louder, closer. They reached the church, the same abandoned structure where Sam had first cut Rose down, and burst through the sagging doors. Inside the building was exactly as Sam remembered: rotted pews, the ruined altar, the gallows still standing beneath the warped cross like an obscene monument. Sam slammed the doors shut, shoved a pew against them as a barricade, and turned to take stock. Robert was bleeding from a cut above his eye, probably from the arrest. Hannah was pale but uninjured, and she clutched the ledger to her chest. They'd kept it, thank God. Daniel looked terrified but determined. Rose could barely stand, leaning heavily on Robert for support. And Sam was running on fumes, his wounded side throbbing with every heartbeat, his vision swimming. Outside, the mob gathered. Sam heard Thorne's voice cutting through the chaos, organizing the men, issuing orders. Lantern light flickered through the gaps in the walls, and shadows moved like predators circling prey. "How many bullets do you have left?" Robert asked. Sam checked. 4 pistol. That's it. 4 bullets and 7 people against a town. Robert laughed bitterly. "We're dead." "Maybe," Sam said, "but we're taking Thorne with us." He moved to the door, peered through a crack, and saw Thorne standing in the street, flanked by Lucas and a dozen armed men. The sheriff looked calm, almost relaxed, as if this was just another day's work. "Marshal Hartwell," Thorne called. "I know you're in there. Come out. Bring the girl and the others. We'll make this quick." Sam didn't answer. "You've done well." Thorne continued, his voice carrying easily in the cold air. "You lasted longer than I expected. But it's over now. You're out of ammunition, out of allies, out of time. Surrender and I'll make sure your death is painless. Fight and I'll make you watch while I hang everyone in there one at a time, starting with the boy." Rose's face went white. Daniel whimpered and Hannah pulled him close. "Don't listen to him, Sam said. "He's trying to scare you." "It's working," Robert muttered. Sam's mind raced. They had no ammunition, no weapons except the 4 bullets in his pistol, no way out. The church had no back exit, and the walls were too weak to hold against the sustained assault. If Thorne's men rushed the door, it would be over in seconds. But Thorne wasn't rushing. He was waiting, confident that Sam would surrender or that starvation and cold would do his work for him, which meant Sam had one asset left: time. And the possibility, slim, desperate, but real, that someone in this town might still have a conscience. Sam turned to Hannah. "You still have the ledger." She nodded, clutched it tighter. "And you wrote down everything you saw. Everything Lucas did." "Yes, but what good does it do us now?" Sam looked around the church at the rotted pews, the ruined altar, the broken windows that looked out onto the street where the mob waited. An idea began to form, insane and desperate, but maybe, just maybe, possible. "Hannah," Sam said, "can you read that testimony aloud? Loud enough for everyone outside to hear?" Hannah blinked. "What?" "Thorne thinks he's won because he controls the narrative. But what if we change it? What if we make this town hear the truth before he silences us?" "They won't care," Rose said. "They already tried to hang me once." "Maybe, but that was before they knew Lucas was the real thief. That was before they knew their sheriff was a war criminal. We give them the truth loud and clear, and we make them choose stand with Thorne or stand for something better." "It won't work," Robert said. "People don't change. Not for strangers." "Then we die trying." Sam looked at each of them in turn. "I'm done trusting the system. I'm done waiting for someone else to save us. If this town won't give us justice, then we'll force them to look it in the eye and decide what kind of people they want to be." Hannah hesitated, then nodded slowly. She opened the ledger, unfolded her testimony, and moved to one of the broken windows. Sam positioned himself beside her, pistol ready in case anyone tried to shoot her. "Read," Sam said. Hannah took a deep breath, and in a voice that shook at first, but grew stronger with each word, she began. "My name is Hannah Pierce. I am 19 years old, and I work at the bakery in Cottonwood Ridge. 3 nights ago, I witnessed Lucas Whitmore, son of Mayor Edmund Whitmore, break into the bakery and steal 100 loaves of bread." Hannah's voice carried through the cold night air, clear and unwavering, and Sam watched the crowd through the window. At first they jeered, shouted her down, called her a liar. But Hannah kept reading, kept detailing exactly what she'd seen. Lucas with the keys, Lucas loading the bread into sacks, Lucas threatening to burn her family's house if she testified. And slowly the crowd began to quiet. "He struck me across the face when I tried to stop him," Hannah read. "He said his father would protect him, that no one would believe a baker's daughter over a Whitmore. He said the vagrant girl Rose McKenna would take the blame, and if anyone questioned it, Sheriff Thorne would make sure they regretted it." Sam saw people in the crowd exchange glances, saw doubt creep into their faces, saw the certainty of the mob begin to crack. Thorne saw it too. "She's lying," he shouted. "The girl's a criminal, coached by a disgraced marshal." "Don't listen to her," but Hannah kept reading, and when she finished her testimony, Robert stepped up to the window. "My name is Robert Pierce," he said, his voice deep and steady. "I'm Hannah's father. I've lived in this town for 20 years, worked the forge, paid my taxes, never caused trouble. And I'm telling you now, my daughter is not a liar. Lucas Whitmore is a thief and a coward, and Wade Thorne is protecting him because the mayor pays him to." "Lies," Lucas screamed from the back of the crowd. "All lies." But now others were speaking up, not to Sam's defense, but to each other, murmuring, questioning. Sam saw an old woman near the front of the crowd turn to the man beside her and say something urgent. Saw a young couple back away from Thorne, as if suddenly uncertain whether they wanted to be part of this. The mob was fracturing, and then from the back of the crowd, a new voice rang out, old, authoritative, unmistakable. "Enough!" The crowd parted, and Reverend Josiah Black stepped forward. Sam hadn't seen the old priest since the hanging, but Josiah looked different now, no longer frail and uncertain, but upright, resolute, his eyes blazing with something that might have been fury or might have been righteousness. He carried a Bible in one hand and a lantern in the other, and he walked through the crowd like Moses parting the Red Sea. He stopped in front of Thorne, and the two men faced each other, the corrupt sheriff and the awakened priest. "I said enough," Josiah repeated. "This stops now." Thorne's face was stone. "Stay out of this, Reverend. This is a matter of law." "Law?" Josiah's voice dripped with contempt. "You wouldn't know law if it bit you. What you call law is tyranny dressed in a badge. What you call justice is murder hidden behind a gavel. Careful, old man. I'm done being careful. Josiah turned to the crowd, raised his Bible. I stood silent when you tried to hang Rose McKenna. I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere, that the law would sort itself out. But I was wrong. The law didn't sort itself out. It protected the guilty and condemned the innocent. And I will not be silent anymore. He pointed at Thorne. This man is a murderer. 15 years ago, he led a massacre of Apache families, men, women, and children on the orders of Edmund Whitmore. He slaughtered 73 people to clear land for a mining claim. And when witnesses tried to come forward, Whitmore buried the evidence and promoted Thorne to sheriff. The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs. Thorne's face went pale, then red with fury. That's a lie. I was following orders, defending settlers. You were murdering families, Josiah roared. Don't you dare hide behind duty. You killed children, Wade, children who never raised a hand against you, and you did it for gold. Thorne reached for his pistol, but someone in the crowd shouted, Don't, and then another voice, we want to hear this, and another, let the Reverend speak. Josiah continued, his voice rising. I have spent 20 years in this town, and I have watched it rot from the inside. I watched you all turn on each other, watched you blame the poor and the desperate for problems created by the rich and powerful. I watched you become Pharisees, men and women who follow the letter of corrupt law while murdering its spirit. He turned to the church where Sam and the others watched through the broken windows. That man in there, Marshall Hartwell, he did what I should have done. He cut down an innocent girl. He risked everything to seek truth. And you want to kill him for it. Silence. The crowd shifted, uncertain. I am calling a town meeting, Josiah declared. Right here, right now. We will hear the evidence, we will hear testimony, and we will decide as a community whether we are a town of laws or a town of lynchings. You have no authority, Thorne began. I have moral authority, Josiah thundered, and that is worth more than your badge, more than Whitmore's money, more than every gun you've pointed at innocent people. Now stand aside or admit to this town that you are the tyrant they fear you are. Thorne's hand hovered over his pistol, and for a long, terrible moment, Sam thought the sheriff would draw, would shoot Josiah where he stood, would trigger a massacre that would end with everyone dead. But then someone in the crowd moved. A woman middle-aged, wearing a tattered shawl, stepped forward and stood beside Josiah. I want to hear the truth, she said. A man joined her, then another woman, then 3 more people, then a dozen, until a wall of townspeople stood between Thorne and the church, and the sheriff's men found themselves facing not frightened civilians, but neighbors, friends, people they'd grown up with. Thorne's hand fell from his pistol. He looked around, saw his power crumbling, saw the town turning against him, and his face twisted with impotent rage. This isn't over, he said quietly. Yes, Josiah replied, it is. The town meeting lasted until dawn. They gathered in the church, not inside because the building was too small and too damaged, but in the street outside where Josiah stood on an overturned crate and presided over the proceedings like a judge. Sam and the others came out of the church slowly, warily, but the crowd parted to let them through, and no one raised a weapon. Hannah testified, first reading her account of Lucas's theft. Then Robert testified about his arrest, about how Thorne's men had beaten him and threatened his family. Then Sam spoke, telling the story of how he'd cut Rose down, how he'd found the ledger, how Dutch Brennan had revealed Thorne's past. And then to Sam's surprise, others came forward. The baker's wife, who'd been silent during Rose's hanging, stepped up and confessed that Lucas had threatened her too, told her to stay quiet about inventory discrepancies or face ruin. The blacksmith testified that he'd seen Lucas loading wagons late at night, had wondered what was being transported, but had been too afraid to ask. The school teacher presented receipts from a black market dealer who'd bought bread from a young gentleman from a wealthy family. One by one, the pieces fell into place, and the town watched as the carefully constructed lie collapsed. Lucas tried to flee. He made it 10 steps before 3 townspeople tackled him, dragged him back, and threw him at Josiah's feet. I didn't kill anyone, Lucas screamed. I just took some bread. It's not murder. You framed a girl for a hanging, Josiah said coldly. That's the same as pulling the rope yourself. The crowd murmured agreement, and Sam saw something shift in their faces. Shame, anger, recognition of how close they'd come to committing an unforgivable act. When the testimonies were finished, Josiah called for a vote. All in favor of denouncing Wade Thorne as sheriff and demanding a military investigation into his conduct, raise your hands. Nearly every hand went up. 40 people, maybe more, standing in the frozen dawn, choosing justice over fear. Thorne stood at the edge of the crowd, his face unreadable, his men clustered around him. He could have fought, could have tried to shoot his way out, but he must have realized that if he did, the town would tear him apart. Instead, he turned and walked away, melting into the crowd, and Sam let him go. This wasn't about revenge. It was about something bigger. Josiah turned to Mayor Whitmore, who'd been standing silently at the back, his face ashen. "Edmund Whitmore," Josiah said, "you are hereby stripped of your position as mayor. You will remain in Cottonwood under house arrest until military authorities arrive to investigate your role in the massacre and your obstruction of justice. If you attempt to flee, this town will hunt you down." Whitmore opened his mouth to protest, but the look in Josiah's eyes and the look in the crowd's eyes stopped him. He nodded mutely and walked away, a broken man. Sam stood in the street, rose beside him, and watched the sun rise over Cottonwood Ridge. It was the same town he'd ridden into a week ago, but it felt different now, cleaner, lighter, as if something poisonous had been lanced and could finally begin to heal. "Is it over?" Rose asked quietly. Sam thought about Dutch alone at the mission, bleeding and surrounded. He thought about Emma, buried 5 years ago under a cottonwood tree. He thought about all the girls like Rose who'd been hanged or beaten or broken because systems failed and people stayed silent. "No," Sam said, "it's not over, but it's a start." They rode to the mission that afternoon, Sam and Rose and a dozen volunteers from the town. They found Dutch alive barely. He'd held off Thorne's men for hours, long enough for Sam and Rose to escape, and when they carried him out of the bell tower, he was unconscious, pale from blood loss, but breathing. The town doctor treated him, and 3 days later, Dutch opened his eyes. "Did you get him?" were his first words. "We got them all," Sam said. "Thorne's on the run, Lucas is in custody, Whitmore's under arrest, and Fort Grant is sending a military tribunal to investigate the massacre." Dutch smiled, a real smile, not the almost smile Sam had seen before. "Good. Then it was worth it." He closed his eyes and Sam thought he'd fallen asleep again, but then Dutch spoke once more, his voice barely a whisper. "Your daughter would be proud of you, Marshal." Sam's throat tightened. "I'm not a marshal anymore." "You're more of one than you ever were when you wore the badge." 2 weeks later, the military tribunal arrived, Colonel Harrington and a full company of soldiers. They took statements, examined evidence, and within days, they'd issued warrants for Wade Thorne, wanted for war crimes and murder. Edmund Whitmore, conspiracy to commit murder. Obstruction of justice, and Lucas Whitmore, theft, perjury, attempted murder. Thorne was found 3 days later, trying to cross into Montana territory. He was brought back in chains, and when he stood trial, Dutch testified, and the jury deliberated for less than an hour. Guilty on all counts, sentenced to hang. Whitmore received 25 years. Lucas got 15 years hard labor. Rose McKenna was fully exonerated, her name cleared, and the territorial governor issued a formal apology. And Sam Hartwell, who'd thrown away his badge to save a girl from a hanging, was offered a new commission chief U.S. Marshal for the Wyoming Territory with full authority to investigate corruption and reform law enforcement. He turned it down. "I'm done wearing badges," he told Colonel Harrington. "I'm done trusting systems. I'm going home." He did. He went back to his cabin, and this time Rose and Timothy came with him. Dutch followed a month later, his shoulder healed, and together they turned the cabin into something it had never been before, a home. Not for one person carrying the weight of guilt and loss, but for a family built from broken pieces, held together by shared survival and the stubborn belief that the innocent should not hang. On the morning Wade Thorne was executed, Sam stood in the crowd and watched the rope tighten around the sheriff's neck. He felt no satisfaction, no sense of triumph, just a quiet, weary relief that one piece of the world's injustice had been corrected. After he walked to the cottonwood tree where Emma was buried, he knelt, placed a hand on the headstone, and spoke aloud for the first time in 5 years. "I'm sorry I failed you," he said. "I'm sorry I trusted the system instead of fighting for you. But I promise I'll never make that mistake again." The wind rustled through the cottonwood's branches, and Sam thought he heard forgiveness in the sound. He stood, turned, and walked back to where Rose waited with the wagon. "Ready?" she asked. Sam looked at the town at Cottonwood Ridge with its new sheriff and its new mayor and its new commitment to something better than what it had been. He looked at Rose, at the life they'd fought for and won against impossible odds. "Ready," he said. They rode home together toward the cabin where Timothy and Dutch waited, toward a future that was uncertain, but theirs built not on broken promises but on hard-won choices. The innocent would not hang. Not today. Not ever again. Not if Sam Hartwell had anything to say about it.